No doctor could save the millionaire's son until a humble waitress stepped forward and did the impossible, leaving everyone speechless and the father in tears. Before we begin, I need to ask you something important. If you don't follow our channel right now, algorithms might keep us apart forever. Your likes, comments, and shares are the only way we can stay connected. Don't let this be our last meeting. Hit that follow button now. Now, let's dive into the story. Marcus Sinclair adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time in 10 minutes. His jaw clenched as he watched his 7-year-old son Timothy struggle with his crutches across the marble floor of Sinclair Medical Center. The irony wasn't lost on him, owning the most advanced private medical facility on the East Coast, yet being powerless to help his own child walk normally. Mr. Sinclair, the Tokyo investors are waiting in conference room A, his assistant Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible in the sterile hallway lined with awards and accolades that suddenly felt meaningless. "Tell them I need 5 more minutes," Marcus replied, his steel-grey eyes never leaving Timothy as the boy paused to rest, his small hands gripping the crutches with determination that both broke and strengthened his father's heart simultaneously. "Doctor." Harrison approached with the latest test results, his expression already telegraphing disappointment. The experimental treatment from Switzerland showed no significant improvement, Marcus. "I'm afraid we've exhausted most conventional options." Marcus's hands curled into fists. 3 years of searching, consulting with specialists from Harvard to Mayo Clinic, spending millions on cutting-edge treatments, and still his son faced each day with courage that humbled the most powerful CEO in the city. Timothy's condition, a rare neurological disorder affecting his motor skills, had stumped every expert they'd consulted. "Daddy, can we get lunch at that place with the really good grilled cheese?" Timothy asked, his bright smile masking any frustration he might feel about his limitations. "Of course, buddy. Anything you want?" Marcus replied, scooping Timothy into his arms, crutches and all. The boy's laughter echoed through the corridor, a sound more precious than any profit margin Marcus had ever achieved. They arrived at Rosie's Diner 20 minutes later, a modest establishment that Timothy had discovered during one of their medical appointments nearby. Marcus felt overdressed in his $3,000 suit among the vinyl booths and checkered floors, but Timothy's excitement made any discomfort worthwhile. "Welcome to Rosie's. Table for 2? The voice was warm, melodious, with an undertone of intelligence that made Marcus look up from his phone for the first time since entering. Emma Thompson stood before them, order pad in hand, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore the standard black uniform, but something about her posture suggested she belonged somewhere far more sophisticated than this humble diner. Her emerald eyes held depths that spoke of experiences beyond her apparent 20-something years. "Yes, our usual table by the window," Marcus replied curtly, already reaching for his phone again. "You must be Timothy," Emma said, crouching down to the boy's eye level with natural ease. "I've heard you make the best grilled cheese recommendations in the entire city." Timothy giggled, immediately charmed. "Daddy says I'm an expert because I've tried grilled cheese everywhere." "A connoisseur," Emma said seriously, as if discussing fine wine. "That's very impressive. I bet you know exactly how the cheese should melt, don't you?" As they walked to the table, Marcus noticed Emma's stride, confident, purposeful, almost clinical. She moved with the precision of someone accustomed to high-pressure environments, not the casual gait he'd expect from a small-town waitress. "Can I help you with those?" Emma asked Timothy, gesturing to his crutches with matter-of-fact kindness rather than the awkward pity most adults displayed. "I got it," Timothy said proudly, maneuvering himself into the booth. "I'm getting really fast with these. I can see that." "Your balance and coordination are excellent," Emma replied, and Marcus caught something in her tone. Not just politeness, but genuine professional assessment. "You seem to know a lot about physical therapy for a waitress," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion mixed with curiosity. Emma's expression flickered for just a moment, a shadow passing across her features before she recovered her professional smile. "I've had some experience with mobility challenges," she replied diplomatically. "Now, what can I get you gentlemen today?" As she took their orders, Marcus found himself studying her hands. They were soft, well-maintained, with calluses in places that suggested activities more complex than carrying plates. When she wrote their order, her penmanship was precise, almost medical in its clarity. "Daddy, she's really nice," Timothy whispered after Emma left for the kitchen. "Yes, she seems." "Adequate," Marcus replied, though his attention kept drifting toward the kitchen, where he could see Emma moving with efficiency that bordered on choreographed. When she returned with their food, Timothy was attempting to open a stubborn packet of crackers, his fine motor skills making the simple task frustratingly difficult. Emma watched for a moment, then sat down beside him. "May I show you a trick?" she asked gently. "Sometimes the angle makes all the difference." She guided Timothy's hands, adjusting his grip with subtle precision that immediately made the task easier. Marcus observed the interaction with growing fascination. Emma's touch was confident, therapeutic, almost like watching a seasoned occupational therapist work with a patient. "There you go. You just needed to engage your thumb muscles differently," Emma explained, and Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. Engage thumb muscles wasn't typical waitress vocabulary. "Are you sure you're just a server here?" Marcus asked directly, his businessman's instincts sensing something wasn't adding up. Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. "I serve food, yes. Is there something wrong with that?" "Nothing wrong with honest work," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her answer. "You just seem to have some interesting skills." "People are full of surprises, Mr. Sinclair," Emma said with a slight smile that could have been interpreted as mysterious or simply polite. The name recognition hit Marcus immediately. "I never mentioned my last name." Emma's eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. "You're Marcus Sinclair. Your picture was in the business section last week, the medical center expansion. Plus, Timothy mentioned you own several hospitals during his grilled cheese expertise consultation." Smooth recovery, Marcus thought, but not quite smooth enough. This waitress had just revealed she read business news and retained detailed information about medical facilities. His curiosity was rapidly evolving into genuine intrigue. "Daddy, can Emma eat with us?" Timothy asked suddenly. "She knows about thumb muscles and she likes grilled cheese too." Marcus expected Emma to politely decline, but she hesitated, glancing around the nearly empty diner. "If your father doesn't mind, I suppose I could take a short break." "Please join us," Marcus heard himself saying, surprising himself with the genuine invitation in his voice. As Emma slid into the booth across from them, Marcus noticed the way she automatically assessed Timothy's posture, the subtle adjustments she made to his positioning without drawing attention to it. Every instinct told him this woman was hiding something significant, and Marcus Sinclair had built his empire by trusting his instincts about people. "So, Emma," he began, leaning back in his seat with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to getting answers, "what brought you to waitressing at Rosie's?" The question landed like a challenge, and Emma's response would determine whether Marcus's growing suspicions were justified or if he was simply intrigued by an unusually observant server who'd happened to capture his son's heart with genuine kindness. Emma's fork hovered over her salad as Marcus's question hung in the air between them. She could feel his penetrating gaze analyzing every micro-expression, every pause. Timothy, oblivious to the underlying tension, was happily demolishing his grilled cheese with the unself-conscious enthusiasm only children possess. "Life doesn't always go according to plan," Emma replied carefully, taking a measured bite to buy herself time. "Sometimes we end up in places we never expected." "That's remarkably philosophical for someone serving comfort food," Marcus observed, his tone carrying just enough warmth to soften what could have been an accusation. "I prefer to think of it as adaptable," Emma shot back with a slight smile. "It's amazing how much you can learn about people when you're not sitting behind a mahogany desk making assumptions about their intelligence based on their job title." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting the subtle verbal jab. "Touché. Though I'd argue that curiosity about someone who discusses thumb muscle engagement with 7-year-olds isn't quite the same as making assumptions." "Fair point," Emma conceded, and Timothy looked up from his sandwich, sensing the adult conversation had taken an interesting turn. "Are you guys having one of those grown-up discussions where you say one thing but mean something else?" Timothy asked with startling perceptiveness. Emma laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her entire face. "Your son is exceptionally bright, Mr. Sinclair." "He gets it from his mother," Marcus replied automatically, then felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always accompanied thoughts of Claire. She'd been gone for 3 years, but the grief still ambushed him at unexpected moments. Emma noticed the shift immediately. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly, with the kind of empathy that suggested personal experience with grief. Marcus studied her face, surprised by the genuine understanding he saw there. "How did you know I was talking about loss?" "The way your voice changed, the slight tension in your shoulders." "Some things are universal, regardless of tax bracket," Emma replied, then seemed to catch herself being too observant again. "You notice a lot for someone who supposedly just brings food to tables," Marcus said, but his tone had shifted from suspicious to intrigued. Timothy had been following the conversation with the intensity of a child who sensed something important was happening. "Emma, do you know about helping people who can't walk good?" The question was innocent, but Emma's reaction was immediate and telling. Her entire body tensed for a moment, her fingers gripping her fork just a bit too tightly. Marcus filed the response away mentally. "I know a little," Emma said carefully. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because sometimes my legs don't work like other kids, and the doctors can't fix it. But when you helped me with the crackers, it felt different. Better somehow." Marcus watched Emma's expression shift through several emotions. Surprise, something that looked like recognition, and then a carefully controlled professional detachment that seemed oddly familiar. "Timothy," Emma said gently, "would you mind if I looked at how you hold things, just to see if there are any little tricks that might help?" She was asking permission from both Timothy and Marcus, but her voice had taken on a tone of quiet authority that made Marcus sit up straighter. This was not a waitress making conversation with a customer. This was someone with actual expertise making a clinical assessment. "Sure," Timothy said eagerly, while Marcus nodded his consent, fascination overriding caution. Emma moved to Timothy's side of the booth, her movements precise and purposeful. She watched him pick up his sandwich, observed his grip on his cup, made mental notes that Marcus could practically see forming behind her focused expression. "Timothy, can you make a fist for me? Good. Now wiggle just your fingers while keeping your thumb still. Perfect." Her voice had shifted entirely, warm but professional, encouraging but analytical. "Your fine motor control is actually quite good," she continued, and Marcus felt his breath catch. Fine motor control was exactly what Dr. Harrison had discussed during their last appointment, the specific area where Timothy struggled most. "Try this," Emma said, showing Timothy how to position his hand differently when reaching for his cup. Engage from your shoulder. Let the strength flow down through your arm to your fingers, instead of trying to force it from your wrist. And the change in Timothy's movement was subtle but immediate. His reach was steadier, more controlled. Marcus leaned forward, hardly believing what he was seeing. "How did you know to do that?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Emma froze, realizing she'd revealed too much. I've helped people before, with similar challenges." "What people? Where? And don't tell me you learned this from serving coffee and pie," Marcus pressed, his paternal desperation overriding any concern about politeness. Timothy was practicing his new grip technique, delighted with the improvement, unaware of the charged atmosphere developing between the adults. "It's complicated," Emma said, starting to withdraw. "My son's condition is complicated too," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years of desperate searching. "So please, help me understand how a waitress knows more about his motor skills than specialists from Johns Hopkins." Emma looked at Timothy, still happily experimenting with his improved dexterity, then back at Marcus. Something in his expression, raw hope mixed with barely controlled desperation, seemed to reach her. "I used to work in pediatric rehabilitation," she said quietly, "before I came here." Marcus felt his world shift slightly. "Used to work? Why did you stop?" "Because sometimes the medical world isn't as pure as people believe," Emma replied, her voice carrying a bitter edge that spoke of personal betrayal. "That's cryptic." "It's honest," Emma countered. "Not everything can be solved with money and connections, Mr. Sinclair, even when you own medical centers." The challenge in her voice sparked something in Marcus, not anger, but recognition. Here was someone who spoke to him without deference or manipulation, someone who saw through his wealth and position to address him as simply another person seeking help for his child. "You're right," he said, surprising both of them. "Money can't cure Timothy. 3 years and millions of dollars have proven that. But knowledge can help, experience can make a difference, and right now, you seem to have both." Emma stared at him, clearly not expecting the admission of vulnerability from someone with his reputation for control and dominance. "What exactly are you asking me?" she said cautiously. "I'm asking you to help my son," Marcus replied simply. "Whatever it costs, whatever you need, whatever went wrong in your past, none of that matters if you can make Timothy's life better." Timothy looked up at both adults, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Emma, would you help me walk better? I promise I'll be good and do exactly what you say." Emma's composure finally cracked slightly, emotion flickering across her features. "Timothy, you're already perfect exactly as you are. Any help I might offer would just be tools to make things easier." "So you'll help?" Timothy asked hopefully. Emma looked at Marcus, then back at Timothy, clearly wrestling with a decision that involved more than just physical therapy techniques. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "This is more complicated than you might realize." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, writing his personal number on the back. "Take all the time you need, but please consider it. Whatever happened before doesn't have to define what happens next." Emma took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact was electric, unexpected, and both of them pulled back slightly in surprise at the jolt of awareness. "I should get back to work," Emma said, her professional mask sliding back into place, but not quite hiding the flush in her cheeks. As she cleared their plates, Marcus found himself memorizing details about her. The way she moved, the careful control of her expressions, the obvious intelligence she was trying to downplay. Timothy was already asking when they could come back to see Emma again. Marcus Sinclair was accustomed to getting what he wanted through persistence and resources. But something told him that Emma Thompson would require a different approach entirely, one that might challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and what he was willing to sacrifice for the people he loved. 03. 3 days passed before Marcus received Emma's call. He was in the middle of a board meeting discussing quarterly projections with investors from 3 different continents when his personal phone buzzed. Seeing an unfamiliar number, he almost ignored it until something made him step out of the conference room. "Mr. Sinclair, this is Emma Thompson from Rosie's Diner." Her voice was different over the phone, more formal, carefully controlled. Marcus felt his pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Emma, I was beginning to wonder if you'd decided against helping Timothy." "I've been thinking about it," she replied. "A lot. If I agree to work with him, there would need to be conditions." Marcus almost smiled. Of course, there would be conditions. In his experience, the most valuable people always had non-negotiable terms. "I'm listening. First, we do this properly, not as a favor or charity case, but as a professional therapeutic relationship. I'll need to see his complete medical history, consult with his current doctors, and establish a real treatment plan." "Done. What else?" "Second, we work at neutral locations, not your house, not the medical center. Somewhere Timothy can feel comfortable and relaxed." Marcus paused, intrigued by her insistence on boundaries. "Any suggestions?" "There's a community center about 10 minutes from the diner. They have an excellent physical therapy space that they rent by the hour. Clean, well-equipped, but not intimidating." "And the third condition?" Marcus asked, sensing there was more. Emma hesitated. "My past isn't up for discussion. You hired me to help Timothy, not to satisfy your curiosity about why I'm working as a waitress instead of doing what I used to do." The slight break in her voice told Marcus everything he needed to know. Whatever had driven Emma from pediatric rehabilitation to serving coffee had been traumatic enough to leave lasting scars. "Agreed," he said simply. "When can we start?" "Saturday morning, 9 a.m. I'll text you the address." Marcus hung up feeling a mixture of hope and anticipation that had nothing to do with Timothy's treatment and everything to do with seeing Emma Thompson in her element. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. Marcus had barely slept, alternating between excitement about potential progress for Timothy and an inexplicable nervousness about seeing Emma again. Timothy, meanwhile, had been talking about nothing but Emma the helper since they'd left the diner. The community center was modest but well-maintained, housed in a converted warehouse with high ceilings and natural light streaming through skylights. Marcus expected to wait, to go through typical preliminary discussions, maybe fill out paperwork. Instead, he found Emma in the physical therapy room, wearing black athletic clothing that revealed toned arms and an athletic build that spoke of serious fitness training. Her hair was pulled back in a functional ponytail, and she was reviewing what appeared to be a detailed folder of documents. "You've been busy," Marcus observed, noting the professional setup, exercise mats, various therapy tools, and what looked like a carefully planned session outline. "I told you, if we're doing this, we're doing it right," Emma replied, looking up with a smile that was warmer than her phone voice had suggested. "Timothy, are you ready to do some work?" "Yes, what kind of work?" Timothy asked eagerly, his crutches tucked under his arms. "The fun kind," Emma said with a wink. "But first, I need to understand exactly how your body works right now. Is that okay?" For the next 30 minutes, Marcus watched Emma conduct the most thorough assessment of Timothy's condition he'd ever witnessed. She was patient but precise, encouraging but analytical, guiding Timothy through movements and exercises while making detailed notes. Her expertise was undeniable. She identified muscle weaknesses and compensatory patterns that previous therapists had missed, asked questions about Timothy's daily activities that revealed insights no doctor had considered, and most remarkably, managed to make the entire evaluation feel like an elaborate game. "Timothy, you're doing fantastic," Emma said as they finished the assessment portion. "Now I want to show you something cool." She guided Timothy to a mat and showed him a series of exercises that looked deceptively simple, but were clearly designed to address his specific neurological challenges. What impressed Marcus most was how Emma modified her approach in real time, reading Timothy's responses and adjusting accordingly. "Feel the difference when you engage your core first?" Emma asked, as Timothy completed a movement with notably better control than his baseline. "Yeah, it's like my whole body works together instead of just my arms," Timothy said, his excitement genuine. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. In 30 minutes, Emma had helped Timothy achieve better motor control than months of conventional therapy. But more than that, she'd given Timothy confidence, made him feel capable rather than limited. "Emma," Marcus said during a break while Timothy was getting water, "where exactly did you train? This level of expertise doesn't happen overnight." Emma's expression shifted, the professional mask slipping back into place. "I told you, my background wasn't up for discussion. Even when it's clearly world-class. Timothy's made more progress in one session than he has in months of traditional therapy. Progress that could disappear if we don't maintain consistency and appropriate boundaries," Emma replied firmly, but Marcus caught the flash of pride in her eyes. Their conversation was interrupted by Timothy's excited voice. "Emma, watch this!" He was attempting the core engagement exercise on his own, his technique imperfect, but his determination absolute. "Excellent work, Timothy. You're getting the hang of it," Emma encouraged, then turned back to Marcus with a softer expression. "He's remarkable, you know. His neural plasticity is exceptional for his condition." "Neural plasticity," Marcus repeated. "That's not basic physical therapy terminology." Emma realized she'd revealed more specialized knowledge and looked away. "I read a lot." "Emma," Marcus said gently, "whatever happened in your past, whatever made you leave medicine, it doesn't change the fact that you have a gift. Timothy responds to you like no other therapist we've worked with. Sometimes gifts come with prices that are too high to pay," Emma replied quietly, watching Timothy practice his exercises with focused determination. Marcus wanted to push for more information, but something in Emma's tone warned him off. Instead, he said, "What matters is that you're helping him now. Thank you." Emma looked surprised by his restraint, as if she'd expected more interrogation about her background. "You're welcome. Same time next week?" "Absolutely. And Emma, whatever you used to do, wherever you trained, you're exactly what Timothy needs now." As they packed up to leave, Timothy hugged Emma goodbye with uninhibited affection. "Emma, you're the best helper ever. Will you be my friend too, not just my teacher?" "Of course, sweetheart," Emma replied, her professional demeanor melting completely in the face of Timothy's innocent request. Marcus watched the interaction, struck by how naturally Emma connected with Timothy, how her walls came down around his son's unguarded enthusiasm. He found himself wondering what it would take to earn that same unguarded response from the mysterious woman who was slowly working miracles with his child. Walking to their cars, Marcus made a decision that surprised him. Instead of pressing Emma for answers about her past, he would earn her trust the same way she was earning Timothy's progress. Gradually, consistently, and with genuine respect for the boundaries she needed to maintain. But as he watched her drive away in a modest sedan that somehow seemed as carefully chosen as everything else about her presentation, Marcus Cudden Sinclair found himself hoping that trust would eventually include letting him understand the fascinating, guarded woman who was bringing light back into his son's world. The anonymous email arrived on a Tuesday morning, sliding into Marcus's inbox between quarterly reports and merger proposals like a poisoned dart aimed directly at his heart. The subject line was clinical, professional, Regarding your son's new therapist, urgent medical ethics concern. Marcus almost deleted it as spam until he saw Emma's name in the preview text. His blood ran cold as he opened the message. Mr. Sinclair, I feel compelled to warn you about Emma Richardson, currently using the alias Thompson. 3 years ago, Dr. Richardson was stripped of her medical license following a catastrophic patient death at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Her experimental treatment protocol resulted in permanent paralysis for an 8-year-old patient. The family's lawsuit revealed gross negligence and falsified research data. I'm shocked to learn she's somehow gained access to your son. Please protect Timothy before history repeats itself. A concerned medical professional attached were what appeared to be court documents, medical board findings, and news articles detailing a malpractice case that had destroyed Emma's career and reputation. The photos showed a different woman, professionally dressed, confident, standing beside research awards and speaking at medical conferences. But the face was unmistakably Emma's. Marcus's hands shook as he read through the documents. Emma Richardson had been a rising star in pediatric neurology, a prodigy who'd graduated medical school at 24 and was conducting groundbreaking research on childhood motor disorders. The case that destroyed her involved a treatment she'd developed, administered without proper authorization, resulting in a child's permanent paralysis. The betrayal cut deeper than any business deception Marcus had ever experienced. Emma hadn't just lied about her past. She'd actively deceived him about the very expertise she was using to treat Timothy. How could he have been so blind? How could he have trusted his son's care to someone who'd already destroyed another child's life? His phone buzzed. Emma's name appeared on the screen, a text confirming Saturday's session. The casual normalcy of her message felt obscene in light of what he'd just discovered. Hi, Marcus. Looking forward to Saturday. Timothy's progress has been remarkable. I have some new exercises that should help with his bilateral coordination. See you at 9. Emma Marcus stared at the message, fury and heartbreak warring in his chest. She was still pretending, still maintaining the fiction that she was simply a former pediatric rehabilitation worker instead of a disgraced doctor whose negligence had ruined a family. He called Emma immediately, his business voice cold and controlled, despite the emotional tornado raging inside him. Emma, we need to talk. Now. Not Saturday. Now. Her voice shifted instantly, picking up on his tone. Marcus, what's wrong? Is Timothy okay? Timothy's fine. It's you I'm concerned about, Dr. Richardson. The silence that followed stretched so long, Marcus thought the call had dropped. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. How did you find out? Someone who cares about my son's safety sent me the truth about your previous career. The question is why you didn't. Marcus, please let me explain. Explain what? How you lied about your identity. How you've been treating my son with techniques developed by someone who paralyzed another child. How you've been pretending to be a simple waitress when you're actually a disgraced doctor who lost her license for malpractice. It wasn't malpractice. Emma's voice cracked with 3 years of suppressed pain. The treatment was working. The family was desperate, just like you are. I was trying to save that little girl's mobility, not destroy it. The medical board disagreed. So did the court system. So did the family whose daughter will never walk again because of your arrogance. Emma's sob was audible through the phone. You don't understand what really happened. The case, the evidence, it was all manipulated. I was set up by people who wanted to steal my research, destroy my credibility so they could claim my work as their own. That's convenient, Marcus replied, though something in Emma's desperation gave him pause. Blame a conspiracy when your own negligence destroyed a child's life. I have proof, Emma said desperately. Documents that show what really happened, who was really responsible. I've been carrying this secret for 3 years, afraid to trust anyone because the people who betrayed me have connections everywhere, including in your world." Marcus felt a flicker of uncertainty, but the fury was too strong. "Even if that were true, you lied to me. You put my son at risk by hiding your history. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now?" "Because you've seen the results," Emma pleaded. "Timothy's progress is real. My techniques work because they're based on sound science, not the lies that destroyed my career. Please, Marcus, don't let their conspiracy hurt Timothy by depriving him of treatment that's actually helping." "The treatment stops now," Marcus said with finality. "Don't contact us again. Don't come near my son. If you attempt any further contact, I'll have security remove you personally." He ended the call before Emma could respond, then sat in his office chair feeling hollowed out and betrayed. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below him like a kingdom he no longer wanted to rule. Everything he'd built, all his success and power, felt meaningless in the face of this deception. But even as he tried to process his anger, Marcus couldn't forget Timothy's excitement about his sessions with Emma, the genuine progress his son had made, the light in Timothy's eyes when he talked about his helper Emma. If Emma was truly dangerous, if her treatment was harmful, wouldn't Timothy's condition have worsened rather than improved? The doubt was a splinter in his mind, growing larger with each passing hour. By evening, Marcus found himself reviewing the anonymous email more carefully, noting inconsistencies in the attached documents, questioning the convenient timing of this revelation, just as Timothy was making unprecedented progress. His private investigator, Jackson Mills, arrived at Marcus's penthouse at 9 p.m. with a preliminary report that would change everything. "Marcus, whoever sent you this information has connections to some very sophisticated people. The email was routed through servers in 3 different countries, but I managed to trace it back to a law firm that specializes in medical patent disputes." "What does that have to do with Emma Richardson?" Jackson spread several documents across Marcus's dining table. "Doctor, Emma Richardson was working on revolutionary treatment protocols for childhood neurological disorders. Her research was worth millions, potentially billions, if developed into standardized treatments. The day before her malpractice case went to trial, 3 senior colleagues at her hospital filed patents for treatments suspiciously similar to her work. Marcus studied the patent filings, his business mind immediately recognizing the pattern. They wanted her research. More than that, they needed her discredited so thoroughly that she could never challenge their theft. The malpractice case was their weapon. I'm still digging, but preliminary evidence suggests the patient's deterioration wasn't caused by Dr. Richardson's treatment. It was caused by a secondary medication administered by another doctor after her protocol had already shown positive results. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. Emma hadn't been lying about a conspiracy. She'd been the victim of one. Her colleagues had destroyed her career and reputation to steal her life's work, then systematically buried evidence that would have exonerated her. "Jackson, I need you to get me everything. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence that was suppressed in the original case, and I need it fast." "Marcus, this kind of investigation could take months." "You have 48 hours, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to moving mountains. "Money is no object. Call in every favor, hire every expert, but I need proof of Emma Richardson's innocence by Thursday." After Jackson left, Marcus stood alone in his penthouse, staring out at the glittering city lights and wrestling with the magnitude of his mistake. He'd accused Emma of being a fraud and a danger to his son, when in reality she was a brilliant doctor whose career had been destroyed by the same kind of corporate greed and manipulation that he knew all too well from his own business world. but the damage was done. Emma was gone, Timothy's progress would halt, and Marcus had lost something precious that he was only now beginning to understand. Not just his son's miraculous therapist, but the woman who had somehow become essential to both their lives in ways that transcended medicine. The next morning, Timothy's excited questions about Saturday's session with Emma felt like daggers in Marcus's heart. How could he explain to his 7-year-old son that the woman who'd given him hope and progress had been driven away by his father's fear and prejudice? How could he admit that his need to control and protect had destroyed the best thing that had happened to their family since Claire's death? As he watched Timothy practice the exercises Emma had taught him, maintaining his improved motor control even in her absence, Marcus made a decision that would determine the course of all their lives. He would find the truth, expose the conspiracy that had destroyed Emma's career, and somehow convince the woman he'd wronged so deeply to forgive him. But first, he had to face the possibility that his accusation and rejection had finally driven Emma beyond his reach, that the second chance at healing and love she'd offered might be lost forever because of his failure to trust in the face of fear. By Thursday evening, Marcus had assembled a war room in his private conference area. Documents covered every surface: medical records, court transcripts, financial statements, and phone records that painted a picture of corruption so systematic it took his breath away. Jackson Mills had worked 48 hours straight with a team of investigators, forensic accountants, and medical experts to uncover the truth. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, Emma's former department head, had orchestrated the entire conspiracy with surgical precision. She'd identified Emma's groundbreaking research on neuroplasticity treatments, recognized its commercial potential, and systematically set about stealing it. The plan had required destroying Emma's credibility so completely that she could never challenge the theft. The patient who'd been paralyzed, Sarah Martinez, hadn't suffered complications from Emma's treatment. She'd been given an experimental muscle relaxant by Dr. Hendricks without Emma's knowledge or consent, a medication that interacted catastrophically with Emma's therapy protocol. Dr. Hendricks had then falsified records to make it appear that Emma had administered the conflicting drug herself. "Marcus, look at this," Jackson said, pointing to financial records spread across the table. 3 days after Emma's license was revoked, Hendricks received a research grant worth $12 million to develop innovative neuroplasticity treatments for children. The grant proposal contains entire sections of Emma's original work, word for word. Marcus felt sick. Emma had been telling the truth about being set up, and he'd been too blinded by fear to believe her. What about Sarah Martinez? Where is she now? That's where this gets interesting. The family moved to Portland 6 months after the settlement. I tracked them down. Sarah's mother agreed to speak with us. What she told my investigator changes everything. Jackson played a recording on his laptop. A woman's voice, heavy with guilt and regret, filled the room. "We knew something wasn't right about the case. Dr. Richardson had been helping Sarah for months, and she was getting better. The treatment was working. Then suddenly she got worse, and Dr. Hendricks said it was because Dr. Richardson had made a mistake with Sarah's medication. But Sarah kept asking for Dr. Richardson, kept saying she wanted her real doctor back. The lawyers convinced us that Dr. Richardson was dangerous, that we needed to sue to protect other children. They promised us money for Sarah's care, but mostly they just wanted us to stay quiet and disappear." Marcus closed his eyes, imagining Emma carrying the weight of this false accusation for 3 years, believing she'd destroyed a child's life when she'd actually been trying to save it. "There's more," Jackson continued. "I found Dr. Richardson's attorney from the original case. The man was scared, Marcus, really scared. He admitted that evidence was suppressed, witnesses were intimidated, and he was basically forced to accept a plea deal that stripped Emma of her license in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. Oh, criminal charges that were completely fabricated, Marcus said grimly. Exactly. Dr. Hendricks has connections throughout the medical establishment. She's destroyed at least 3 other promising researchers over the past decade using similar tactics. Emma was just the most successful victim. Marcus stood up, pacing to his windows. The city lights below reminded him of Emma's eyes that first day at the diner, bright with intelligence and shadowed with pain he'd been too blind to understand. Where is Emma now? That's the problem. She's disappeared. Quit her job at the diner, packed up her apartment, left no forwarding address. My sources think she's planning to leave the country. Maybe start over somewhere her reputation can't follow her. The thought of Emma fleeing, of losing her forever because of his betrayal, galvanized Marcus into action. Find her. I don't care what it costs or how many people you have to hire. Find Emma Richardson and bring her home. Marcus, even if we find her, getting her to trust you again after what happened, I'll face that when the time comes. Right now, I need to focus on clearing her name and making sure the people who destroyed her life face justice. Marcus spent the next 3 days orchestrating what he privately called Operation Redemption. He used every connection, every favor owed, every ounce of influence he'd accumulated over years in business to systematically dismantle the conspiracy that had destroyed Emma's career. First, he hired the best medical malpractice attorney in the country to file motions for Emma's license reinstatement based on new evidence. Then he arranged for Sarah Martinez's family to be relocated closer to specialized treatment centers, with all expenses paid and a trust fund established for Sarah's continued care. The most satisfying part was arranging Dr. Patricia Hendricks's downfall. Marcus's team presented evidence of her research theft and medical fraud to the State Medical Board, the FBI's white-collar crime division, and 3 different medical journals that had published her stolen work. By Friday afternoon, Hendricks had been arrested, her medical license suspended, and her stolen research grants frozen pending investigation. But none of it mattered if Marcus couldn't find Emma and convince her to forgive him. The breakthrough came on Saturday morning. Jackson called at dawn with news that made Marcus's heart race. I found her. She's in a small town called Cedar Falls, about 2 hours north of here. She's staying at a bed and breakfast, apparently trying to decide whether to take a job offer from a clinic in Vancouver. Marcus was in his car within 10 minutes, driving through the early morning darkness toward a confrontation that would determine the rest of his life. He'd prepared speeches, practiced apologies, rehearsed explanations of the evidence that proved her innocence. But as he pulled into the parking lot of the Cedarwood Inn, all his preparations crumbled into a single desperate truth. He loved Emma Richardson, and he'd nearly destroyed them both by failing to trust in that love when it mattered most. Emma was sitting on the inn's front porch swing, wrapped in a cream-colored sweater and holding a cup of coffee. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, as if the weight of 3 years of false accusations had finally broken something essential inside her. When she saw him approaching, her expression didn't change. No surprise, no anger, just a weary resignation that broke Marcus's heart. "How did you find me?" she asked quietly. "I have good investigators," Marcus replied, settling onto the porch steps where he could see her face clearly. "Emma, I need you to know that I know the truth now. About Dr. Hendricks, about what really happened to Sarah Martinez, about how you were set up to take the blame for someone else's greed and negligence." Emma's coffee cup trembled slightly in her hands. "It doesn't matter now. The damage is done." "It does matter. Hendricks has been arrested. The medical board is reviewing your case for full reinstatement. Sarah Martinez's family wants to meet with you to apologize for their part in the cover-up. Your research is being credited to you, not to the people who stole it." For the first time since he'd arrived, Emma showed emotion, a flicker of hope quickly suppressed. "Even if all of that's true, it doesn't change what you said to me. How quickly you believed I was a danger to Timothy, how easily you threw away what we were building together." Marcus felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. "You're right. I failed you when you needed trust most. I let fear override everything I knew about your character, your integrity, your love for Timothy. I'm not asking you to forget that or pretend it didn't happen." "Then what are you asking?" Marcus looked into Emma's green eyes, seeing past the pain to the woman who'd brought miracles into his and Timothy's lives. "I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove that I can be worthy of your trust. I'm asking you to come home and help me raise Timothy in a world where brilliant, caring people like you are protected and valued instead of destroyed by corrupt systems." Emma was quiet for a long time, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Timothy must be wondering what happened to his sessions. He asks about you every day. He's been practicing the exercises you taught him, maintaining his progress even without you there to guide him." But Marcus paused, then decided to risk complete honesty. "But it's not just Timothy who needs you, Emma. I need you. Not as Timothy's therapist or as Dr. Richardson, the brilliant researcher. I need Emma, the woman who challenges me to be better, who sees through my wealth and power to the man I want to become." Emma set down her coffee cup and looked directly at him for the first time since he'd arrived. "Marcus, what are you really saying?" "I'm saying that I love you," Marcus replied simply. "I fell in love with you in Rosie's diner, when you made Timothy laugh while helping him with his crackers. I fell deeper in love watching you work with him, seeing your passion and expertise shine through every interaction. And I realized how much I loved you when I thought I'd lost you forever because of my own fear and stupidity." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling now. The first genuine smile he'd seen since he'd destroyed everything with his accusations and suspicion. "You know this is crazy, right?" she said softly. "A CEO and a disgraced doctor turned waitress. The society pages will have a field day." Marcus grinned, feeling lighter than he had in days. "Let them talk. I own half the media companies in the city anyway. But Emma, if we're going to do this, I have one condition." "Oh, now you have conditions?" Emma asked with a hint of her old teasing tone. "I want you to be Timothy's doctor, not just his therapist. I want you to have your own research lab, your own team, the resources to continue the work that was stolen from you. I want the whole world to know that Dr. Emma Richardson is the brilliant woman who not only healed my son, but somehow managed to heal his broken father as well." Emma stood up from the porch swing and walked over to Marcus, cupping his face in her hands with the same gentle precision she'd used to guide Timothy through his exercises. "That sounds like a pretty good deal, Mr. Sinclair," she said, her voice warm with the love and trust that had almost been lost forever. "But I have a condition too. Anything. Next time someone tries to convince you that I'm dangerous or untrustworthy, you come to me first. You ask me for the truth instead of making assumptions. Can you promise me that?" Marcus covered her hands with his, looking into the eyes of the woman who'd become his second chance at everything that mattered. "I promise. And Emma, there won't be a next time. From now on, when the whole world is against you, I'll be standing right beside you, fighting for us." When Emma kissed him, soft and sweet on the porch of a small-town inn, Marcus finally understood what he'd been searching for his entire adult life. Not just success or security or even love, but partnership. Someone who would challenge him, trust him, and build something beautiful together from the ashes of their separate heartbreaks. They had work to do. Timothy was waiting for them both, and Emma's career needed to be fully restored. But for now, holding the woman he loved in the golden light of a new day, Marcus Sinclair finally felt like he'd come home. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, watching Emma work the crowd at her reinstatement celebration with the same natural grace she'd once brought to serving coffee at Rosie's Diner. The medical community had gathered to officially welcome back Dr. Emma Richardson, whose groundbreaking research was now being implemented in pediatric hospitals across the country. "She's remarkable," Dr. Harrison commented, appearing at Marcus's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone command respect the way she does. Hard to believe 6 months ago she was hiding her identity in a diner." Marcus accepted the champagne, but kept his eyes on Emma as she spoke with a group of neurologists about her latest research protocols. She wasn't hiding. She was protecting herself from people who would have destroyed her all over again if they'd found her. And now she has someone to protect her while she changes the world, Marcus replied with quiet satisfaction. Plus, she's about to become a Sinclair, which comes with its own armor. Dr. Harrison chuckled. "Speaking of which, have you told her about Timothy's latest progress reports? His improvement is being documented for publication in 3 different medical journals." Marcus smiled, remembering Timothy's excitement that morning when Emma had shown him his latest assessment scores. His son was now testing within normal ranges for fine motor control, gross motor coordination, and bilateral integration. The crutches had been retired 2 months ago, replaced by a confidence that transformed everything about how Timothy moved through the world. "She knows, but what she doesn't know is what I have planned for tonight." Across the room, Emma caught his eye and smiled, the same warm, knowing smile that had first captured his attention in that humble diner. She excused herself from her conversation and made her way through the crowd toward him. "Are you hiding from your own celebration?" she asked, slipping her hand into his with natural ease. "I'm not hiding. I'm plotting," Marcus replied, leading her toward the hotel's rooftop garden. "There's something I want to show you." The rooftop had been transformed into a private paradise, with string lights twinkling among carefully arranged flowers and a single table set for 2. Timothy was already waiting, dressed in his best suit and grinning with barely contained excitement. "Surprise!" Timothy called out as they approached. "Dad said I could help with the special dinner." Emma looked between Marcus and Timothy, clearly sensing something important was happening. "What's all this?" Marcus guided her to the table, where 3 place settings indicated this was meant to be a family affair. "Timothy and I wanted to celebrate your reinstatement properly, away from the crowds, just the 3 of us." As they settled into their seats, Timothy could barely contain his excitement. "Emma, guess what? Dad says you're going to be my real mum now, not just my doctor." Emma's eyes widened, looking to Marcus for explanation. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I know we've talked about getting married," Marcus began carefully. "But I realized there was something we'd never properly discussed. Timothy's been asking when you're going to officially become his mom, and I realized I'd been thinking about this all wrong." Emma's voice was soft with emotion. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been planning a traditional proposal, thinking about romantic settings and perfect speeches, but our love story was never traditional, Emma. It started in a diner with a little boy who needed help, and a woman brave enough to provide it despite her own pain. It grew through trust and betrayal and forgiveness. It's not a fairy tale romance. It's something better. It's real." Marcus slipped from his chair and knelt beside Emma, but instead of producing a ring, he gestured to Timothy, who ran to join them. "Emma Richardson," Marcus continued, "will you marry us? Not just me, but our family?" Will you be Timothy's mother and my wife, and the partner I want beside me for every challenge and triumph that comes our way?" Timothy pulled a small velvet box from his pocket with ceremonial seriousness. "We picked it out together," he announced proudly. "Dad said it had to be perfect for the perfect mom." Emma opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller emeralds that matched her eyes perfectly. But what made her cry wasn't the beauty of the ring. It was the way Timothy immediately threw his arms around her neck, whispering, "Please say yes, Emma. I already told everyone at school you're my mom." "Yes," Emma managed through her tears. "Yes to marrying you, yes to being Timothy's mother, yes to this beautiful, complicated, perfect family we've somehow created together." As Marcus slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, Timothy cheered with the uninhibited joy that had been missing from their lives before Emma had walked into that diner 6 months ago. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, producing an official-looking document from his jacket. "I've established the Richardson Foundation for Pediatric Research with an initial endowment of $50 million. You'll have complete autonomy to pursue whatever research you think is most important, with resources to hire the best team in the world." Emma stared at the document, then at Marcus, then at Timothy, who was still clinging to her with the fierce affection of a child who'd found his missing piece. "Marcus, this is too much. The foundation, the research lab, all of it." "It's not enough," Marcus interrupted gently. "Emma, you saved my son's life and gave me back my faith in love and partnership. This foundation is just the beginning of what I want to build with you. We're going to change how the world treats children like Timothy, how it supports brilliant researchers like you, how it protects people who dare to innovate and care more about healing than profit." Later that evening, after Timothy had been tucked into bed with stories about their upcoming wedding and promises that nothing would change except that Emma would officially be his mother, Marcus and Emma stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out over the city that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about that first day at Rosie's?" Emma asked, her engagement ring catching the city lights. "Every day," Marcus replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was so arrogant, so certain I could control everything with money and influence. I had no idea that a waitress with mysterious skills and a guarded heart would teach me what real power looks like." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally at peace with her past and excited about their future. "And I never imagined that a demanding CEO with trust issues would become the man who would fight to clear my name and give me back my career and my confidence." "We're quite a pair," Marcus murmured against her hair. The disgraced doctor and the workaholic CEO, brought together by a little boy who needed us both to become whole. "Speaking of Timothy," Emma said with a mischievous smile, "he's been asking when he's going to get a little brother or sister. Apparently, having one parent who's a doctor and one who owns hospitals means we should be able to make perfect babies." Marcus laughed, the sound rich with happiness and possibility. "That boy has been through enough medical terminology to last a lifetime. But Emma, when you're ready, when we're ready as a family, I can't think of anything I'd love more than watching you bring new life into this world we're building together." 6 months after that, Doctor. Emma Sinclair stood in the research lab of the Richardson Foundation, her hands resting on her growing belly as she watched Timothy help her research assistant organize data from their latest clinical trial. Their treatment protocols were now being used in 47 hospitals worldwide, helping hundreds of children achieve mobility and independence their parents had never dreamed possible. Marcus appeared in the lab doorway, still wearing his suit from a board meeting, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, the look of a man who'd learned to balance professional success with personal happiness. "How are my 3 favorite people today?" he asked, kissing Emma's cheek and ruffling Timothy's hair with equal affection. Timothy's been helping me calculate success rates, Emma replied, her hand automatically finding Marcus's as they watched their son, brilliant, confident, and walking without any assistance, explain statistical analysis with the enthusiasm of someone who'd inherited both parents' intelligence and determination. And baby sister is practicing her soccer kicks, Timothy announced, placing his small hand on Emma's belly with the gentle reverence of an older brother already deeply in love with his sibling. Marcus knelt beside his family, his hand joining Timothy's on Emma's stomach, marveling at the life growing there. A life that represented not just their biological connection, but everything they'd overcome to build this extraordinary partnership. "We're going to have to expand the lab," Emma said with mock seriousness. "Between Timothy's research assistants and this little one's eventual contributions to pediatric medicine, we're going to need more space." "Whatever you need," Marcus replied, and Emma knew he meant it with the same absolute commitment he'd shown when he'd fought to clear her name, when he'd proposed to their entire family, when he'd stood beside her through every challenge and triumph since that day in Rosie's diner. Looking at her husband, her son, and the foundation they'd built together, Dr. Emma Sinclair understood that miracles weren't just medical breakthroughs or unexpected recoveries. Sometimes miracles were simply love that refused to give up, trust that survived betrayal, and second chances that transform not just individuals but entire families, communities, and ultimately the world itself. Outside the lab windows, the city spread before them like a promise, a place where a waitress could become a respected doctor again, where a guarded CEO could learn to trust completely, where a little boy's need for healing could bring together two broken hearts and make them whole. The miracle touch that had started it all lived on, not just in Emma's healing hands, but in every life their love had transformed, every challenge they'd overcome together, and every hope they held for the future they would continue building, one act of courage and compassion at a time.
The clatter of silverware and the low hum of dinner conversation were the soundtrack to Brooke Miller's life. But on a Tuesday evening, that soundtrack screeched to a halt. It wasn't a dropped tray or a shouting customer. It was a hand, a surprisingly strong, cold hand that clamped down on her arm like a manacle. Brooke gasped hot coffee, sloshing dangerously in the pot she held. An elderly woman, draped in pearls and smelling of lavender, was staring at her wrist with an intensity that burned. The woman's eyes, a faded blue, were wide with a look of frantic discovery. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice a fragile yet demanding thing. Before Brooke could answer, the woman's grip tightened her knuckles white. She looked up, her gaze locking with Brooke's, and declared to the stunned restaurant, "This birthmark, it runs in our family." Brooke Miller believed her life was composed of unremarkable moments, stitched together by the relentless rhythm of shifts at the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that was far less glamorous than its name suggested. Her days were a blur of taking orders, refilling drinks, and forcing a smile for customers who rarely saw her as more than a pair of hands. At 24, her world was small, defined by her tiny studio apartment, her towering stack of community college textbooks, and the dull ache in her feet at the end of a 10-hour shift. She was an orphan, a word that felt stark and cold, even to her. Raised in a series of foster homes, she had no baby pictures, no family heirlooms, no stories of a doting grandfather or a mother's lullaby. Her only tangible link to a past she couldn't remember was a peculiar birthmark on the inside of her right wrist, a perfect coffee-colored crescent moon. It was her secret anchor, a piece of her personal geography that no one else could claim. That Tuesday evening was aggressively ordinary. The dinner rush was just beginning to ebb, and Brooke was navigating the narrow space between tables, a fresh pot of coffee in hand. Table 7, a party of 3, had been her focus for the last hour. An elegant, silver-haired woman, a man in a crisp suit who looked to be her son, and a younger man, perhaps in his late 20s, with a dismissive air and a phone that seemed permanently attached to his hand. They looked out of place amongst the restaurant's usual clientele of weary shoppers and office workers. They radiated a quiet, intimidating wealth. Brooke approached their table. More coffee for anyone, she asked, with her practiced, polite smile. The older man, Robert, gave a slight nod. "Just for my mother, thank you." As Brooke leaned over to pour, her sleeve slid back an inch, exposing her wrist. It was then that it happened. The elderly woman's hand shot out her fingers, wrapping around Brooke's arm, with a strength that belied her frail appearance. Brooke froze the coffee pot, hovering precariously over the table. The woman whose name she now knew was Beatrice Davenport. Wasn't just holding her. She was gripping her, turning her arm over to get a better look at the crescent moon. "Where did you get that?" Beatrice's voice was a ragged whisper, but it cut through the restaurant's drone. Brooke was too stunned to speak. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was bizarre, aggressive. People at nearby tables were starting to stare. The younger man, Nathan, finally looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. "Mother, for heaven's sake, let the girl go." "You're making a scene," he muttered, not even looking at Brooke. But Beatrice was in a world of her own. Her thumb traced the outline of the birthmark, her touch both trembling and firm. A wild, desperate hope ignited in her faded blue eyes. She looked up directly into Brooke's confused and frightened face. "This birthmark," she said, her voice rising with conviction, gaining strength. "The crescent moon. It runs in our family. This was my Josephine's mark." The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent. Brooke could feel a hot blush creeping up her neck. She tried to pull her arm away, but the old woman's grip was unyielding. "Ma'am, please," Brooke stammered, her professionalism cracking. I was born with it. I don't know what you're talking about." Robert, the son, finally stood up, his face a mask of controlled apology. He placed a gentle hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mother, calm down. You're upsetting her." He turned his apologetic eyes to Brooke. "I am so sorry. My mother. She gets confused sometimes. She lost her daughter a very, very long time ago." "I am not confused. Robert," Beatrice snapped, her voice cracking with emotion. "I would know this mark anywhere. It's hers. It has to be her." Her eyes filled with tears, which began to trace paths through the fine powder on her cheeks. She was looking at Brooke not as a waitress, but as a ghost, a miracle. Brooke finally wrenched her arm free, stumbling back a step. The coffee pot clattered as she set it down on a nearby table. She was trembling, a cocktail of fear, anger, and profound embarrassment coursing through her. I think you have the wrong person," Brooke said, her voice barely a whisper. She wanted to run, to disappear into the kitchen and never come out. The manager, Mr. Henderson, was now rushing over his face, pinched with concern. "Is there a problem here?" Nathan spoke up, his tone laced with venomous condescension. "No problem. My grandmother just had a momentary lapse. We're leaving." He threw a $100 bill onto the table, more than enough to cover the check, and began to usher his grandmother to her feet. Beatrice resisted, her gaze still locked on Brooke. "No, we can't just leave." "Look at her eyes, Robert." They're just like hers. Robert, looking mortified, took a firmer hold of his mother's arm. He then did something unexpected. He pulled a pen and a business card from his jacket pocket. He scribbled something on the back and pressed it into Brooke's hand. "My sincerest apologies for this scene," he said, his voice low and earnest. "My mother hasn't been herself lately. But for her peace of mind, would you be willing to call me just to talk? We would be happy to compensate you for your time and for this disturbance." Brooke stared at the card. It was thick, expensive cardstock. Robert Davenport, CEO, Davenport Industries. Below it was a handwritten cell phone number. She looked from the card to the family. Nathan was glaring at her as if she'd orchestrated the whole thing. Robert looked genuinely conflicted. And Beatrice? Beatrice looked utterly broken, a lifetime of grief etched onto her face as her son led her away. As they left, a profound silence hung over the restaurant before the whispers began. Brooke stood frozen, the business card feeling like a hot coal in her palm. The crescent moon on her wrist, once a quiet personal symbol, now felt like a brand, a question mark that had just been shouted to the world. Her unremarkable life had just been violently interrupted, and she had a terrifying feeling that nothing would ever be the same. The business card sat on Brooke's cramped kitchen counter for 2 days, a stark white rectangle of possibility and dread. She'd pick it up, feel the embossed letters of Davenport Industries, and immediately put it down again. Her roommate, Jessica, a pragmatic nursing student, was less conflicted. "You have to call Brooke. This is straight out of a movie," Jessica said, gesturing with a spoonful of yogurt. "An eccentric rich family, a long-lost heir, a secret birthmark. Best-case scenario. You're secretly a millionaire. Worst-case scenario, you get a crazy story out of it, and maybe they'll give you some money for the emotional distress. They're not eccentric, Jess. They're intense." The way that woman looked at me, it was terrifying. Brooke countered, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. And the son, Nathan, he looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. So what? He's a jerk. His dad seemed okay. And the grandma is obviously grieving. Just call. What do you have to lose? Another shift smelling like stale bread and regret. Jessica had a point. What did she have to lose? Brooke's life was a hamster wheel of work and study. She had no family to disappoint, no inheritance to protect. There was a tiny, deeply buried part of her, the part that had spent years in foster care, wondering who she was and where she came from, that was undeniably curious. The word Beatrice had used, Josephine, echoed in her mind. With a deep breath, she dialed the number. Robert Davenport answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and collected as it had been in the restaurant. He apologized again profusely for his mother's behavior. "She hasn't stopped talking about you," he admitted, a weary sigh in his voice. "I know this is an incredible imposition, but it would mean the world to her, to us, if you would consider meeting. We could come to you, or perhaps you would be our guest for lunch at our home this Saturday. We would, of course, send a car." The offer hung in the air, dripping with a casual wealth that was alien to Brooke. A car. Lunch at their home. It felt like stepping into another dimension. Against her better judgment, the flicker of curiosity won. "Okay," she heard herself say. Saturday would be fine. On Saturday morning, a sleek black car, so quiet it seemed to glide rather than drive, pulled up in front of her run-down apartment building. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, held the door for her, as if she were royalty. The half-hour drive took them out of the city and into the rolling hills of the countryside, where the houses grew larger and the fences taller. They finally turned onto a long, tree-lined driveway that led to a house known an estate. It was a sprawling stone manor that looked like it had been plucked from the English countryside, surrounded by acres of perfectly manicured lawns. Brooke's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just money. This was a dynasty. Robert Davenport met her at the door, his expression warm and welcoming. He led her through a grand foyer with a soaring ceiling and a marble floor that echoed with their footsteps. "My mother is in the sunroom. She's been looking forward to this all morning," he said, guiding her down a long hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors. Beatrice was seated in a plush armchair overlooking a vast garden bursting with roses. She looked smaller, more fragile than she had in the restaurant. When she saw Brooke, her face lit up with a fragile, hopeful smile. Nathan was there too, standing by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his expression a carefully constructed mask of indifference. "My dear child," Beatrice said, her voice trembling as she held out a withered hand. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Brooke sat hesitantly on the edge of a pristine white sofa. An uncomfortable silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Beatrice broke it. "My daughter." She began, her eyes distant, fixed on a memory. Her name was Josephine. She was a whirlwind, full of life, but so reckless, headstrong. She had her father's temper, and my heart, a dangerous combination. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When she was 19, she fell in with a bad crowd. A boy, a drifter. We disapproved, of course. Her father, Arthur, he was a very proud, very firm man. He forbade her from seeing him. They fought. Terrible, terrible fights. Beatrice's voice cracked. And then one night, she was gone. She left a note. Said she was running away to live her own life, and that we shouldn't look for her. Robert picked up the story, his voice somber. "We tried. We hired private investigators for years, but it was like she vanished off the face of the earth. That was 25 years ago. 25 years. 2 months and 12 days, Beatrice corrected softly. And in all that time I have prayed for a sign, for some news. And then I saw you." She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "That mark on your wrist." Josephine was born with the exact same one. A perfect crescent moon. My husband's mother had it, and her mother before her. It's a Davenport mark passed down through the women in our line. Brooke felt a chill run down her spine. It was just a coincidence. It had to be. I was a foundling, Brooke said quietly, feeling the need to fill the silence. Left at a hospital in a nearby town. No note, no name. The nurses called me Brooke. Miller is just a common name they assigned me. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The hope in her eyes intensified, becoming a blazing fire. "Don't you see, Robert? It all fits. She would have been scared alone. She would have wanted her baby to be safe." Nathan finally spoke, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, it's a perfect story. A little too perfect, don't you think? An orphan waitress with a convenient birthmark just happens to serve the one family in the city who might be looking for someone like her. It's a miracle. Or a very clever scam." Nathan Roberts' voice was sharp. "That's enough." "Is it? Nathan pushed himself off the mantelpiece and took a step towards Brooke, his eyes narrowing. "How long have you been planning this? Did you research us? Find out about my long-lost aunt and get a tattoo to match?" The accusation was so vile, so unexpected, that it took Brooke's breath away. "A tattoo," she stammered, outrage, giving her a sliver of courage. "Are you serious? I've had this my entire life." She thrust her wrist forward. "Look at it. Does that look like a tattoo to you?" Robert stepped between them. Nathan apologized to Ms. Miller at once. "She is our guest." Nathan just scoffed, turning to stare out the window. "I'm just being realistic. You're being led by sentiment. Think about what this means if it's true. She would be an heir, entitled to a share of the Davenport fortune." The word fortune hung in the opulent room, making everything feel cold and transactional. Brooke suddenly felt nauseous. This wasn't about a grieving grandmother finding a long-lost connection. It was about money, about a legacy she had no part in. "I don't want your money," Brooke said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I didn't ask for any of this. I think I should go." She stood up, her dreamlike curiosity curdling into a nightmare of suspicion and greed. "No, please don't go." Beatrice cried, tears streaming down her face again. "He didn't mean it. He's just protective. Please, my dear. We just need to know for sure." Robert put a calming hand on Brooke's arm. "Nathan is out of line. But he has raised a valid, if tactless, point. Speculation and stories aren't enough. There is a way to know for certain." He looked from his mother to Brooke, his expression serious. "A DNA test." The suggestion of a DNA test landed in the silent sunroom with the force of a gavel. It was a cold, scientific solution to a deeply emotional puzzle. For Nathan, it was a weapon to expose a fraud. For Robert, a logical step to manage an escalating situation. For Beatrice, it was the final key to unlocking a door she had been rattling for 25 years. And for Brooke, it was terrifying. Her entire identity was built on a foundation of not knowing. She was Brooke Miller, a blank slate. To have that slate suddenly scribbled on, with a history, a name, a family, it was overwhelming. What if it was true? Her life of scraping by, of feeling utterly alone in the world, could be over. The thought was as frightening as it was seductive. What if it wasn't true? Then she would be cast out of this strange fairy tale, sent back to her real life, with the added sting of humiliation and a glimpse of a world she could never have. "A test," Brooke repeated softly, looking at the three distinct faces of the Davenport family. The hopeful grandmother, the cautious son, the hostile grandson. "It would be simple, non-invasive," Robert explained calmly, as if discussing a business transaction. "We would use a reputable private lab. Everything would be handled with the utmost discretion. We would compare your sample with mine. As Josephine's brother, the genetic link would be undeniable." Beatrice nodded eagerly. "Yes, Robert, arrange it. As soon as possible." Nathan smirked. "Don't rush to redecorate her room just yet, Grandma. Let's see what the science says." Despite Nathan's venom, Brooke agreed. The not knowing was now worse than any potential outcome. She needed an answer, if only to silence the wild what-ifs that had started to scream in her head. The next week was a strange limbo. Robert arranged for a private nurse to visit Brooke's apartment to take a simple cheek swab. The process was sterile and quick, but the implications felt momentous. As the nurse sealed the sample in a biohazard bag, Brooke felt like she was mailing a piece of her soul to a laboratory. The Davenports in the interim began to cautiously weave her into their lives. Beatrice would call her every day, her voice frail and full of questions. She wanted to know Brooke's favorite color, what she was studying, what her dreams were. They were simple questions, but they felt loaded, as if Beatrice were trying to superimpose the ghost of her daughter onto the blank canvas of Brooke's life. Robert, true to his word, wanted to compensate her. He sent over a check that was more than she made in 6 months. Brooke stared at it, feeling a fresh wave of nausea. Cashing it felt like accepting payment for a role she might not even be qualified to play. She tucked it away in a drawer untouched. More practically, Robert insisted she quit her job at the Gilded Spoon, at least until the results came in. You shouldn't have to deal with the stress and the gossip, he'd said. Let us take care of your expenses for the time being. It's the least we can do. Reluctantly, she agreed. The freedom from the daily grind was intoxicating, but it also made her feel unmoored. She was living in a holding pattern, her life on pause, waiting for a verdict from a lab. Nathan remained her shadow of doubt. He made no effort to contact her, but she felt his presence. One afternoon, Jessica came home from a class, her eyes wide. "You are not going to believe this," Jessica said, dropping her books on the table. "I saw him, the grandson, Nathan. He was on campus talking to Professor Albright from the genetics department." Brooke's blood ran cold. "What?" "Why, I don't know. I just overheard a bit. He was asking about birthmarks, genetic markers, how easy it would be to fake something, or if a DNA test could be fooled. He's investigating you, Brooke. He's trying to find a hole in your story." The news was a punch to the gut. While Beatrice was planning a future, Nathan was digging through her non-existent past, determined to prove she was a liar. The realization hardened something inside her. A part of her now wanted the test to be positive, just to see the look on his face. A few days later, Robert invited her back to the estate. The DNA results were due the following morning, and Beatrice wanted them to be together when they received the news. The atmosphere in the house was thick with anticipation. Beatrice was practically vibrating with a nervous energy, flitting about the room, tidying things that were already tidy. Robert was pacing, checking his phone every few minutes. Even Nathan seemed to have lost his cool composure. He stood staring out the window, his jaw tight. To pass the time, Beatrice brought out a dusty leather-bound photo album. "This is Josephine," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she opened it to a picture of a laughing, rebellious-looking teenager with a wild mane of dark hair and startlingly bright eyes. Brooke leaned in her own heart, thudding. She searched the girl's face for any hint of herself, any familiar curve of a cheek or shape of a smile. She saw nothing. The girl in the photo was a stranger. Beatrice, however, saw everything. "Look, Robert. The eyes. They're the same shade of blue. I told you." Robert looked, his expression unreadable. "They are similar. Mother." Brooke felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. What if Beatrice's hope was so powerful, it was making her see things that weren't there? The weight of the old woman's expectations felt crushing. To be the source of such immense joy or such devastating disappointment, it was too much to bear. As the evening wore on, Beatrice shared more stories of Josephine. Her first horse, her secret treehouse, her love of thunderstorms. Brooke listened, feeling like an imposter. She was absorbing the memories of a dead girl, a girl she probably had no connection to. Before she left, Robert had insisted on booking her a room at a nearby hotel so she wouldn't have to travel back and forth. He pulled her aside in the grand foyer. "Brooke," he said, his voice low, "I want you to be prepared for any outcome tomorrow. My mother, she has built this up in her mind to be a certainty. If it's not the news she's hoping for, it will destroy her. And if it is," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "if it is, our lives will change forever. And so will yours. I just want you to know that whatever happens, I am grateful that you have given my mother this period of hope." His words, meant to be reassuring, only amplified her anxiety. She was a vessel for this family's hope and grief. Tomorrow, that vessel would either be filled to the brim or shattered completely. As the car pulled away from the magnificent, intimidating house, Brooke pressed her hand against the window, feeling more alone than ever. The next morning, Brooke met the Davenports in Robert's study. The room was imposing, lined with dark wood shelves, filled with leather-bound books that looked as if they hadn't been touched in a century. A massive mahogany desk sat in the center, and on it a laptop was open waiting. The air was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. Beatrice was seated in a wing-back chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She hadn't slept. Dark circles stood out starkly against her pale skin. Nathan leaned against a bookshelf, affecting a casual pose that didn't quite hide the nervous energy thrumming through him. Robert stood behind the desk, his shoulders squared as if bracing for an impact. "The lab emailed the report a few minutes ago," Robert announced to the silent room. His voice was steady, but Brooke saw a slight tremor in his hand as he moved the mouse. "The file is password protected. I have the code. Are we all ready?" Beatrice gave a small, jerky nod. Brooke's own heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt strangely detached, as if watching a scene from a movie where she was a minor character. Robert typed in the password and clicked. A PDF document bloomed onto the screen, filled with clinical text and complex charts. A layman wouldn't be able to decipher the genetic sequences, but the conclusion highlighted at the bottom of the first page was written in stark, unambiguous English. Robert's face went pale. He read it once, then again, his brow furrowing in confusion. He seemed to shrink before their eyes. "What is it?" Beatrice's voice was a thin, reedy whisper. "Tell us." Robert slowly looked up from the screen, his eyes finding his mother's. His expression was one of profound pity and sorrow. "It's negative," he said, the words falling like stones into the silence. "There's no match. According to this report, there is a 0% probability that Brooke Miller is the daughter of Josephine Davenport." The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Brooke felt the floor drop out from beneath her. 0%. Not a small chance, not a distant relation. Nothing. A stranger. Beatrice made a small, wounded sound like an animal in pain. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, that's not possible. The lab made a mistake. They have to have made a mistake. The birthmark. The science is clear," Mother Robert said, gently. His voice strained. He walked over and knelt by her chair. "I'm so sorry." Nathan let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh. He pushed himself off the bookshelf, a look of smug, bitter vindication on his face. "Well, well. What a surprise. I told you. I told you from the very beginning this was a scam." He turned his cold, triumphant gaze on Brooke. "Congratulations," he sneered. "It was a good performance. You almost had us. Had my grandmother convinced you were her long-lost miracle? What was the plan? Wait for the old woman to get attached and then bleed her dry?" "Nathan, stop it," Robert warned, his voice cracking. But Nathan was on a roll, his cruelty unleashed. "I bet that birthmark isn't even real. I bet it washes off with a bit of soap and water. You're pathetic. Preying on a grieving family." Each word was a physical blow. Brooke felt dizzy, the room tilting around her. The hope she hadn't even let herself fully acknowledge was now a gaping, painful wound. And on top of that, this vicious, baseless attack. She looked from Nathan's hateful face to Robert's pitying one, but it was the sight of Beatrice that shattered her. The old woman wasn't looking at her anymore. All the light, all the frantic hope that had animated her for the past week had been extinguished. Her face was a grey, slack mask of utter devastation. She looked at Brooke, and for the first time she saw only a stranger, a waitress, a disappointment. The rejection in that single glance was more painful than any of Nathan's insults. I didn't lie," Brooke whispered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. "I never asked for any of this. I told you it was probably a coincidence, a very profitable coincidence for you," Nathan shot back. "A free week off work, a nice hotel stay." "That's enough," Robert roared, finally getting to his feet. He looked at Brooke, his face etched with regret. "Miss Miller." "Brooke, I am truly sorry for this, for my son's behavior and for putting you through this emotional ordeal. It was unfair of us. We let hope cloud our judgment." His tone was formal again. The brief intimacy they had shared was gone. She was Ms. Miller once more. "I think it's best if you go now," he said quietly, not as a request, but as a dismissal. He reached into his jacket. "Let me write you a check for your trouble." "No," Brooke said, finding a sliver of strength in her humiliation. "I don't want your money. I never did." She turned and walked out of the study, not daring to look back at Beatrice's crumpled form. She walked head held high through the echoing marble foyer, past the portraits of the Davenport ancestors who were not and never would be her family. She didn't stop until she was outside in the crisp autumn air, the massive oak door clicking shut behind her with a dreadful finality. She walked the entire length of the long, tree-lined driveway, her legs moving robotically. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away. The black car that had ferried her to this gilded cage was nowhere in sight. She had been discarded. The fairy tale was over, and she was back in the real world. Only now she was more alone, more lost than she had ever been before. The crescent moon on her wrist felt like a cruel joke, a meaningless mark on the skin of a nobody. The weeks that followed the DNA test were a grey smear of existence for Brooke. She'd had to beg Mr. Henderson for her job back at the Gilded Spoon, enduring his suspicious questions and the pitying stares of her co-workers. The untouched check from Robert Davenport sat in her drawer like a monument to her humiliation, and she eventually tore it into tiny pieces. Life was not just back to normal. It was worse. The quiet loneliness of her apartment now felt like a suffocating silence. Before her unknown past was a neutral void. Now it was a confirmed emptiness. Meanwhile, a different kind of silence had fallen over the Davenport estate. It was the heavy, oppressive silence of grief. Beatrice had retreated into herself, a ghost haunting the opulent rooms of her home. She rarely spoke, and when she did, Her voice was listless. The brief, brilliant flame of hope Brooke had ignited in her had been snuffed out, leaving behind only the cold ashes of her 25-year-old sorrow. Robert was consumed by a different emotion: guilt. He felt guilty for his mother's pain, guilty for the false hope he'd allowed to fester, and guilty for the way they had treated Brooke. He couldn't shake the image of her face in the study, the shock, the hurt, the dignity she had clung to as his son flayed her with accusations. One rainy afternoon, unable to bear the funereal atmosphere of the house any longer, Robert found himself in his late father's study. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a distraction. He ran his hand along the spines of the untouched books and found himself drawn to a large carved wooden chest in the corner of the room, a place where his father, Arthur Davenport, used to keep old business files and personal effects. Arthur had been a formidable man, proud, controlling, and emotionally distant. He had ruled his family with the same iron fist he'd ruled his company. His disapproval of Josephine's choices had been absolute. Robert opened the chest. The air smelled of old paper and leather. Beneath stacks of yellowed financial ledgers, his fingers brushed against a smaller tin box tied with a faded red ribbon. He didn't recognize it. Curiosity piqued. He lifted it out and untied the ribbon. Inside were letters, dozens of them written in a familiar looping script. Josephine's handwriting. But they weren't addressed to her parents. They were addressed to someone named Anna. A close friend, perhaps. Robert's heart began to beat faster. These weren't the rebellious, angry letters of a runaway. These were the desperate, fearful letters of a prisoner. He sat down in his father's leather chair and began to read. October 12th. Anna. He found my last letter. Father, I mean. He didn't yell. It was worse. That quiet, cold fury of his. He told me I was a disgrace to the Davenport name and that he would see me locked away before he let me run off with Daniel. He wasn't exaggerating, Anna. I saw the look in his eyes. He's locked the gate phone, so I can't make calls. I'm smuggling this out with Mrs. Gable from the kitchen staff. He says Daniel is nothing but a fortune-hunting pauper, but he's wrong. Daniel sees me, not my name. Another letter dated a week later. October 19th. Anna. I'm so scared. Father is talking about sending me away. To a school in Switzerland. It's not a school, it's a sanatorium. A place for hysterical young women. He's trying to have me committed to get me away from Daniel. Mother just weeps. She's too afraid of him to stand up for me. She begs me to just do as he says to forget Daniel, but I can't. He is my whole world. We have to run. Daniel has a plan. It's crazy, but it might be the only way. Robert's hands trembled as he read. This wasn't the story he'd been told. His father hadn't just disapproved. He had been a tyrant, a jailer. He remembered the arguments, the shouting behind closed doors. But he had been young, taught to revere his father and see his sister as wild and disobedient. He kept reading his stomach, twisting into a tight knot. The last letter was almost illegible. The ink smudged with what could have been tear stains. November 3rd. Dearest Anna, if you are reading this, it means our plan worked, or it failed spectacularly. We're leaving tonight. Daniel has arranged everything. It's going to look like I ran away a simple note on my pillow. But we're going further than that. We have to disappear completely, or Father will never stop hunting us. He'll use all his money, all his power, and he will find me. Daniel says we have to fake my death. Can you believe it? A car accident in some small town, hundreds of miles from here. A body burned beyond recognition using stolen dental records. It's insane. But it's the only way to be free of him. Don't tell anyone. Don't ever tell them. Let them think I vanished. It's better they mourn a runaway than for father to hunt a fugitive. There is something else. Something I haven't told anyone, not even Daniel yet. I'm pregnant, Anna. I'm going to have a baby. A little crescent moon to match my own. I have to protect this child from him, from this house, from this name. I love you. Your friend Josephine. Robert dropped the letter as if it had burned him. Pregnant. She had been pregnant. Everything shifted. The entire foundation of his family's story crumbled into dust. His sister hadn't just run away from a disapproving father. She had been fleeing an oppressive monster. She had faked her death to protect herself and her unborn child, and that child, a baby with the crescent moon birthmark, the DNA test. He replayed it in his mind. They had tested Brooke's DNA against his. It came back negative. But why? If Brooke was Josephine's daughter, she was his niece. There should have been a clear link. Unless a dark, unthinkable thought began to form in the recesses of his mind. A thought rooted in the coldness he had always felt from his father, the strange distance in his parents' marriage, and his mother's deep, inconsolable bond with her daughter. His father had called Josephine a disgrace to the Davenport name. What if that had been more than just a turn of phrase? What if he'd meant it, literally? He stood up, the letters clutched in his hand. He looked at the portrait of his father that hung over the mantelpiece, stern, proud, unyielding. He had worshipped this man, feared him, obeyed him, and this man had terrorized his own daughter and lied to his family for a quarter of a century. The guilt he felt for Brooke was now dwarfed by a tidal wave of anger and betrayal. The DNA test wasn't a mistake. It was the wrong test. He strode out of the study, his purpose clear. He had to find Brooke. And then he had to confront his mother. He had a feeling there was one more secret buried in this house of lies. Finding Brooke was harder than Robert expected. She had moved out of her apartment without a forwarding address. The Gilded Spoon reported she had quit again, this time for good. It was as if she, like Josephine, had decided to vanish. But Robert Davenport had resources his sister never did. He hired a private investigator, the best in the city, and within 48 hours he had a location, a small, unassuming apartment complex on the industrial side of town. He drove there himself, the tin box of Josephine's letters on the passenger seat beside him. He found Brooke just as she was leaving, carrying a laundry basket. She looked thinner, her face pale, the spark in her eyes dimmed. When she saw him approaching, her body stiffened. She clutched the laundry basket like a shield. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I need to talk to you, Robert," said his own voice, strained. "I know you have no reason to listen to me, but please, I've discovered something about my sister, about everything." Brooke's expression was a wall of skepticism. "If you've come to offer me money again, you can save your breath." "No," Robert said, shaking his head. "I've come to apologize and to ask for your help." He told her everything. He stood there on the cracked pavement of the parking lot and read her excerpts from Josephine's letters about her fear of Arthur, about her love for a man named Daniel, about the plan to fake her death, and finally about the baby. As Brooke listened, her wall of indifference began to crack. The story resonated with the fragments of her own lonely existence, a baby left with nothing protected from a past she never knew. Her hand instinctively went to her wrist, to the crescent moon that had caused her so much pain. Why would the DNA test be negative? She asked the question hanging in the air between them. If I'm her daughter, you're my uncle. It should have been a match. That's the question I've been asking myself for 2 days. Robert said, his face grim. And I think I know the answer. But I need to hear it from my mother. He looked at Brooke, his eyes pleading. Will you come with me? I know I have no right to ask, but I think she needs to see you. We all need the truth, whatever it is. Brooke was torn. Returning to that house, to the site of her deepest humiliation, was the last thing she wanted to do. But the story in those letters had planted a new seed in her heart. This wasn't about the Davenport fortune anymore. This was about a terrified 19-year-old girl named Josephine and the baby she had tried to save. This was about her. She nodded slowly. I'll come. When they arrived at the estate, the atmosphere was as heavy and somber as they'd left it. They found Beatrice in the sunroom, staring blankly at the rose garden. Nathan was with her reading a book, though it was clear he was only there to keep watch over his grandmother. When he saw Brooke walk in behind his father, he shot to his feet, his face darkening with anger. What is she doing here? He demanded, stepping in front of his grandmother protectively. Haven't you done enough damage? Nathan, be quiet and listen, Robert said, his voice carrying an authority his son had never heard before. He walked over to his mother's chair and knelt before her, placing the tin box in her lap. Mother, I found these in Father's chest. They're from Josephine. Beatrice flinched as if the box were hot. She looked down at it, then up at Robert, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Read them, Robert urged gently. Or let me read them to you. We need to talk about what really happened to Josephine. We need to talk about Father. For the next hour, Robert's voice filled the sunroom as he read his sister's words aloud. He did not spare his mother any of it. The descriptions of Arthur's cruelty, Josephine's terror, the desperate plan to escape, and the final shocking revelation of her pregnancy. With every word, Beatrice seemed to shrink further into her chair. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. Nathan stood frozen, his earlier animosity draining away, replaced by a look of horrified disbelief. The grandfather he had been taught to admire was being painted as a monster. The aunt he'd never known was not a reckless runaway, but a victim. When Robert finished the last letter, a profound silence descended. He looked at his mother, his heart breaking for her, but his resolve firm. The DNA test, Mother, he said softly. It said, Brooke wasn't my niece. There's only one reason that could be true. He paused, the terrible question hanging between them. Josephine wasn't my full sister. Was she Arthur? Davenport wasn't her biological father. The room held its breath. Nathan stared at his grandmother, his mouth agape. Beatrice finally broke. A lifetime of secrets of fear and guilt came pouring out in a torrent of sobs. She clutched the letters to her chest, her body racked with tremors. He was a cold man. She cried, her voice raw with ancient pain. Your father, Arthur. He was married to his business, to his name. He gave me this house. He gave me jewels. He gave me everything but himself. I was so lonely. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes, finding Robert's, then flitting to Brooke. It was years before you were born, Robert. There was someone else, an artist, a gentle, kind man who made me feel alive. It was brief, a terrible mistake, but I loved him, and I got pregnant. She took a shuddering breath. It was Josephine. I tried to pass her off as Arthur's, and he may have suspected, but he accepted it to avoid a scandal. But he never, ever forgave me. He raised her as a Davenport, but he never loved her. He saw my betrayal in her face every single day. That's why he was so hard on her. That's why he hated Daniel. It was history repeating itself, his daughter falling for a man with nothing to his name, just like her mother did. The confession filled the room, shattering the pristine image of the Davenport dynasty forever. Robert was not Josephine's full brother, but her half-brother. And the birthmark Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a Davenport mark, Beatrice sobbed. That was a lie I told myself for so long, I started to believe it. It came from him, from her real father. He had the same perfect crescent moon on his wrist. Suddenly, it all made sense. The DNA test hadn't failed. It had told the truth. Brooke was not genetically related to Robert, because Robert was not related to Josephine's biological father. Brooke stood by the door, a silent witness to the demolition of a family. She was no longer an outsider. She was the catalyst, the living proof of a secret that had festered for over 50 years. Nathan, looking completely shattered, finally moved. He walked over to Brooke, his eyes filled with a shame so profound he could barely meet her gaze. I am so sorry, he stammered, his voice thick. For everything I said, for how I treated you. I was wrong about everything. Robert looked from his devastated mother to the granddaughter she had unknowingly found. There's only one way to be certain, he said, his voice filled with a new, somber resolve. We need another test. This time comparing Brooke's DNA not to mine, but directly to yours, mother. The second DNA test was arranged with a quiet, solemn urgency. The atmosphere was entirely different this time. The frantic hope and bitter suspicion were gone, replaced by a fragile, shared need for truth. There were no accusations, no grand pronouncements, just a family fractured and raw, waiting for a final piece of their history to click into place. During the week-long wait for the results, the dynamics within the Davenport estate underwent a seismic shift. Nathan, humbled and deeply ashamed, tried to atone for his earlier cruelty. He called Brooke not to interrogate her, but to talk. He asked about her life, her studies, her dreams. The same questions his grandmother had asked, but this time they were tinged with genuine interest and regret. He told her about the grandfather he had idolized and the complex, difficult man he was now learning his father Robert truly was. A tentative, fragile bridge was being built between them, spanning the chasm of their first impressions. Robert focused on his mother, sitting with her for hours as she finally unburdened herself of the secrets she had carried for decades. He learned about her loveless marriage, her brief, cherished affair, and the crushing guilt of watching her husband punish her daughter for her own transgressions. He was not just comforting his mother. He was truly meeting her for the very first time. Brooke, at Robert's insistence, stayed at the estate. She was given a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, a beautiful room overlooking the gardens. But she felt less like a guest, and more like a ghost wandering the quiet halls, trying to imagine the life of the young woman who had fled this gilded cage. She found herself standing before the portrait of Arthur Davenport, staring into his cold, painted eyes, and felt an unexpected surge of gratitude for Josephine's courage. Her mother, and she was starting to allow herself to think of her that way, had saved her from him. The day the results were due, they gathered not in the intimidating study, but in the sunroom, the same room where Beatrice had first told Brooke about her lost daughter. The morning light streamed in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Robert's laptop sat on a small table. He opened the email from the lab, his movements slow and deliberate. He typed in the password and opened the PDF. This time, he didn't read it to himself first. He simply turned the screen so they could all see. There at the bottom of the page was the conclusion. Maternal match. The DNA profile of Beatrice Davenport is consistent with that of a biological grandmother to the subject, Brooke Miller. The probability of this relationship is 99.999%. The clinical words sang with a power that transcended science. 99.999%. A choked sob escaped Beatrice's lips. It wasn't a sound of pain, but of profound, earth-shattering release. She reached out a trembling hand towards Brooke, her eyes swimming with tears. "My granddaughter." She whispered the words, a prayer answered after a lifetime of waiting. "My Josephine's baby girl." Brooke moved towards her, her own tears blurring her vision. She took her grandmother's hand, and this time the touch wasn't a desperate grab in a restaurant, but a gentle, welcoming embrace. She knelt by Beatrice's chair, and the old woman wrapped her arms around her, holding on as if she would never let go. Decades of grief, loneliness, and secrecy melted away in that single moment. Robert stood back, watching them, a sad yet peaceful smile on his face. His family was broken, yes, but it was no longer built on lies. Nathan came and stood beside his father, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked at Brooke now enfolded in his grandmother's arms, and for the first time he saw her not as an intruder or a problem, but as family, his cousin. The questions that came next were not about money or inheritance, but about life. Robert, using his resources, was able to track down the story of what happened after Josephine ran away. They learned that she and Daniel had made a new life for themselves under new names in a small town in Oregon. She had given her baby girl up for adoption, a closed adoption, to ensure Arthur Davenport could never find her, always intending to come back for her once it was safe. But tragedy had struck. Just 3 years later, Josephine and Daniel were killed in a real car accident, a cruel twist of fate, leaving their daughter an orphan, her true identity buried with them. Brooke Miller finally had a history. She had a mother's name, Josephine, a grandmother, Beatrice, an uncle, Robert, a cousin, Nathan. She had a story, a messy, complicated, tragic, and beautiful story that was entirely her own. Standing in the sun-drenched room, surrounded by the remnants of her newfound family, Brooke looked down at the crescent moon on her wrist. For 24 years, it had been a mark of her solitude, a symbol of everything she didn't know. Now she understood. It wasn't a question mark. It was a period. It was the end of one story, the story of a lonely orphan, and the beginning of a new one, a story she would finally get to write for herself. The Davenport fortune was hers by right, but as she looked at the tearful, smiling face of the grandmother who had found her in a crowded restaurant, she knew she had already inherited the only thing that truly mattered. And so Brooke's life was changed forever, not by a lottery ticket or a stroke of luck, but by a mark on her skin that carried a secret history of love, fear, and sacrifice. Her story reminds us that family is not always simple or straightforward. Sometimes it's a tangled web of secrets kept to protect the ones we love. Sometimes the truth can shatter the foundations of everything we thought we knew, only to help us rebuild on something stronger, something real. What would you do if a stranger claimed you were their family? Would you be brave enough to seek the truth no matter where it led? The most incredible stories are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for one single moment, one touch to bring them into the light. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story. If it touched your heart, made you think, or kept you on the edge of your seat, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story with twists and turns, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that you won't want to miss. Click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, remember to look closer. Everyone has a story to tell.